Hello. So, we just had this storm coming through. So that's probably messed some things up. But it seems to be okay here. Art, I noticed that about only being able to find it on your phone. So when you're using a desktop or laptop or whatever, you go through a PC to YouTube. Sometimes what shows up when you go to our channel is uploaded videos, and you probably have to click on that and look for live streams. Or also, it may just show up in a minute after it started. Anyway, you should be able to find it. Well, let's do this. And a little thunder in the background, nice sort of soundtrack while we're meditating, if that keeps up. I like to meditate when it's raining. The dogs don't like it, though. Dogs keep coming in here and looking at me like wanting me to make it stop, which of course I can't do. And my bell's over here. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Got to have atonement. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought. Now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought. Now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought. Now I atone for it all. fragrance of this incense invites the awakened mind to be present with us now. The fragrance of this incense fills our room, protects and guards our minds from wrong thinking. The fragrance of this incense unites us with precepts, concentration, and insight. We offer it for all beings. Homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I shall become one with the Buddha. I resolve that I shall each day follow the way of life he laid down for us to walk and awaken to his supreme wisdom. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I shall become one with the Dharma. The gates of Dharma are manifold. I vow to enter them all. The goal of wisdom is ever beyond. I shall attain it. I go to the Sangha for guidance. I shall become one with the Sangha. In the spirit of universal fellowship and as a member of the Sangha, I pledge myself to strive for the enlightenment of all beings. There's a dog down there. The Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with the boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upward to the skies and downward to the depths, outward and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, sitting or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into the world of suffering. May I be happy and well. May no harm come to me. May I learn compassion. May all my friends, family, and those I love be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those troubled in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those who have hurt me in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those I have hurt in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all my enemies be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all living beings be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. I just saw there was a lot of comments, so I just was looking to see if everybody was okay. Take a few deep breaths. Buddha nature is free from greed, free from hatred, free from delusion. Because of the Buddha's awakening, awakening is available to us all. As you exhale, let these phrases ride silently on your breath. May I be happy. May I be free from animosity. May I be free from stress and affliction. May I look after myself with ease. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from animosity. May all beings be free from stress and affliction. May all beings look after themselves with ease. This body, from the hair of the head to the soles of the feet, enveloped by the skin, is filled with manifold things. None of them are self. Form is not self. Feeling is not self. Perception is not self. Thoughts are not self. Awareness is not self. Life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us must strive to awaken. Pay attention. Do not squander this life. Bring your attention to the breath in the belly or the tip of the nose. Just observe the breath for a few moments. You don't have to do anything special. Breathing in, know that you're breathing in. Breathing out, know that you're breathing out. You can note your breaths with Budo or by counting if you like. Or just rest your attention gently on the breath. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here now. In offering candles and incense, hearing the Dharma and training the mind, great merit is attained. We dedicate this merit to the great Master Sakyamuni Buddha, the all-pervading and everlasting three treasures, to the 16 guardians and all protectors of the Dharma and their relations throughout space and time, to all ancestors of this Sama and all beings in the Dharma world. May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance. Let all karma be resolved in the mind flower bloom in eternal spring. May the Dharma body maintain strength and health, and years of life be lengthened for all teachers of this Sangha. May their vows be fully realized, and may they live in perfect peace with Buddha Dharma. We pray for those suffering from violence and those who grieve for them, those living in oppression, all who are imprisoned who should be free, for all refugees from violence, hunger, and catastrophe, man-made or natural. We pray for the health and well-being of those suffering from diseases of body, mind, or spirit, those working toward the healing of those afflictions. We pray for those suffering from COVID-19, those working to protect and treat them, and for those grieving to those lost of this pandemic. May they be serene through all their troubles, and may we realize the enlightened way together. Sabe sata sadahantu avera sukajivino katang konya phalang maihang sabe bhagi bhavantu te. May all beings always live happily, free from animosity. May all share in the blessings that spring from the good we have done here today. Is it stormy where you are too, Ellen? It hit here pretty hard, but we didn't lose power or anything like that. I was worried about that. I always worry about that when it rolls in just about the time I'm supposed to go live. But the sound of the rain now is really pleasant. I like it. So I've had a few of these conversations recently, partly as a result of some of the stuff that came up in the Dhammapada readings. You'd be happy to know that the next chapter, those of you who are coming on Thursdays, the next chapter is different. So different in ways that are a little bit more pleasant, maybe. Anyway, so some of these conversations have been, I was drawn to Buddhism because it didn't seem to have some of these things in it that some other religions have that I didn't like, and that kind of thing. And so I thought we would talk a little bit tonight. Well, I say I would talk a little bit tonight about, religion and whether you can be religious and still be rational, because sometimes religion doesn't look very rational. So, I want to go back to this friend of mine that I have from, I probably met him about 20 years ago, I guess. I was working as a journalist, as a freelancer full-time. Howdy, John. I had been asked to cover commission meetings in a small town in West Volusia. And so this friend of mine, Lewis, was serving on the city commission at the time. And he was also a minister in a Congregationalist church. And so, but he was retired mostly, and he had spent most of his career as a chaplain in the military, Navy, I think. Anyway, so not long after I met him, I was asked to do a feature story about religion. And so this was 2000. This was not long after September 11th, after 9/11. And so the editor that assigned me this had heard that church attendance was exceptionally high right then. And he wanted me to look into that, find out if that was true, because it was, kind of one of those things that was reported nationally, but sometimes when you chase it down, it, isn't universal. So he wanted me to look into that. And he also wanted me to do a sidebar of some kind on the subject of religious tolerance. Because at the time, again, this was right after 9/11, there was a growing awareness of Islam in the country. And even the president at the time, George W. Bush, was talking about the need for understanding and acceptance between religions. Imagine feeling nostalgic for George W. Bush and his tolerance. Anyway, I was asked to interview the head of a newly formed ministerial association and also to get a few other religious leaders to talk to me about this issue. And so I figured with his military chaplain background and everything that Lewis would be a good choice for this conversation. And so it happened that, I put out some calls to people and I was able to reach Lewis first. And so we had a very interesting conversation. So he had spent a fair amount of time in Japan on a Navy base there, or Air Force. I think it was Navy. And at this particular base, there were both Japanese and American personnel. And so he had shared chaplain duties there with a Buddhist chaplain. And talking with the Buddhist, he had been surprised by how much common ground they had found. And he said to me at one point in this conversation, he says, I came away from that thinking that God had revealed himself different cultures in different forms. And I thought that was a very enlightened way of looking at things. I was impressed by that. Well, the next day, I interviewed the head of this ministerial association, who was also a minister at a local evangelical church. I don't remember what denomination exactly. I met him at the church, and we got on the subject of religious tolerance, and his view was compassionate in some ways. He said, if the community experienced a major disaster, he'd want to help everyone, regardless of creed and all of that sort of thing. But that was as far as it went. He said I'd work right alongside of everybody. But as far as God goes, we're right and they're wrong. So here you have two religious leaders, similar age, representing the same religion, different denominations, but their denominations were fairly close to one another on the family tree of Christianity. They were both Protestants. And yet they had very different views on what religious tolerance meant, and maybe even on what religion itself meant. I've been thinking about this idea of religious tolerance, and I concluded that in order to have religious tolerance, you have to have tolerant religions. And not all religions, or at least not all schools and sects and so on, have that capacity, I don't think. Because I think you have to be kind of rational to be tolerant. I know for people who are going to watch this, who are going to be really mad at me, but stick with me because it gets better. So as you consider the idea of religious tolerance, we might start by wondering if it's possible to be religious and rational. And if we, as members of society and as a spiritual community, maybe could find a way to model a healthier approach to religion. So, kind of look at the way Western culture and Western thought has dealt with religion at times. And some of the greatest thinkers of modern Western history have suggested that humankind should really try to transcend the idea of religion altogether. So, for example, in the early 1960s, Albert Ellis wrote an essay called The Case Against Religion. And he pointed out that the goal of psychotherapy, and he was a psychologist, was to help patients be minimally anxious, I'm quoting him, and hostile, minimally anxious and hostile, and thus to acquire certain personality traits that support that ability to be minimally anxious, minimally hostile, including tolerance. He said a mentally healthy person should fully give other human beings the right to be wrong. so a mentally healthy person should fully give other human beings the right to be wrong. While disliking or abhorring some of their behavior, he should accept the fact that all humans are fallible and refrain from despising or punishing them when they make inevitable mistakes and errors. And Ellis felt that religion was the enemy of tolerance. He said, because it sets absolute God given standards, that religion teaches us to react to our own errors with self hatred and to despise and dehumanize others that we don't approve of. And this kind of thinking promotes exactly the anxiety and hostility that a therapist wants to treat. So I've had some conversations recently with people who have gone through religious experiences where the religion basically taught them that sort of I don't know that self-hatred would be the right term, but reacting to our own errors with self-hatred and consequently just dehumanizing others that we see as on not on the same standard as us because they don't subscribe to our same belief system. And he said, back to Ellis, said, from a mental health standpoint, Voltaire's famous dictum should be reversed. Voltaire said, if there were not a God, it would be necessary for us to invent him. And he said, from a psychotherapeutical standpoint, if there is a God, it would be necessary to uninvent him. So he was pretty down on religion back in those days. Again, this is about 1961 or so. He was not the only social scientist who doubted the social and psychological value of religion. Freud famously said of religion, the whole thing is so patently infantile, so foreign to reality, that to anyone with a friendly attitude to humanity, it is painful to think that the majority of mortals will never be able to rise above this view of life. In other words, he saw religion as so infantile, and it was painful to think that so many people could never rise above it. And he felt that religion was basically a universal obsessional ritual. In other words, religion was sort of a shared neurosis, a shared, psychological dysfunction, for lack of a better term, and that society uses to avert misfortune, much of the way somebody with an obsessive compulsive disorder might use hand washing or hoarding in an attempt to control life. And he equated neurotic behaviors to the idea of private religion. He said, a neurosis is basically a religion with a congregation of one. So to him, religion was this kind of mass delusion. So the scientific research has explored this issue and come up with some interesting things in recent decades. First, there have been some documented negative effects of religion on mental health, which might not surprise some of you. There were a group of researchers from Mississippi who reviewed more than 700 studies that investigated the relationship of religion and mental health. And among other things, they found some evidence in support of what Ellis was concerned about, that religion increased feelings of hostility and decreased feelings of well-being. So some patients develop feelings of excessive guilt and condemnation because of religion. And those who focus on religious writings that describe God's judgments may experience stress from striving to be virtuous. So the other night, we were finishing up the section on the Dhammapada that really kind of goes into yeah, I know. I agree with Ellis too. That goes into the sort of putative nature of karma, and it's really drawing probably from old folks' tales that existed before in India before Buddhism. But you don't know. But there are all these sort of morality stories. You've heard the morality stories that you do a bad thing and you're going to get punished for it. And Buddhism's not really like that, but some of these stories come across that way. Anyway, you said that some religion may promote anxiety in people who worry about family members who don't share their beliefs. And I hear this a lot. My mom is convinced I'm going to go to hell because I started going to Buddhist meetings, that kind of stuff. And she's really worried about me. Others may have anxiety over worrying about prophecies, about future events, the Antichrist, pervasiveness of sin in society, and all of that. But you hang around long enough, pay attention. You meet people who who get hung up on that. When is the world going to end? Stuff. Intense religious experience has been shown to lead to transient psychotic episodes, and religious ideas can fuel delusions in some psychiatric patients. It can cause problems in interpersonal relationships, diminish social support because of dogmatic religious attitudes. And there are people who are kind of mentally not real healthy, who can rely on faith rather than treatment, often with negative outcomes. So that's not me. From research came up with this, but the same 700 studies they reviewed, the same researchers found that almost 500 of these studies actually showed that involvement with religion correlated positively with happiness and with life satisfaction, marital stability, hope, purpose, sense of meaning in life, less loneliness, fewer psychotic tendencies, lower rates of criminal activity. So on the one hand, you've got a bunch of studies that say religion basically causes you to be mentally unwell, or is correlated to it anyway. And on the other hand, you've got studies that say, no, religion's really good for you, right? So, and neuroscientists started measuring benefits of religion too. There were some researchers at Columbia who looked at 130 people. And what they found was that those who placed a high value on spiritual practice, not necessarily, were super dedicated to a particular denomination or anything, but placed a high value on spiritual practice, showed a thickening in a particular part of the brain cortex. The thinning of that part of the brain is correlated with a high risk of depression. And so they concluded that it's possible, looking at the brain. I mean, there's where neuroscience says, you can see these changes in the brain and what it's correlated with, but you can't necessarily say there's a cause and effect. But the suggestion is that a high rate of religious engagement predicts a lower risk of depression and drug abuse, and fewer suicide attempts, and a higher level of overall well-being. So that you could ask yourself, well, if religion is so bad for you, how can it be so good for you, right? So when I talked to my friend Lewis for that piece about religion, and the subject of atheism came up. I don't know how, I don't remember why. I don't think I asked him about atheists, but he brought it up. And it turns out that he was not only tolerant toward other religions, but he was more understanding than you might expect when it came to atheists. And he said something that was pretty funny. He said, when I meet someone who tells me they don't believe in God, I ask them, well, what God is it that you don't believe in? In other words, describe this God to me that you don't believe in. And when I hear them tell me about that God, I say, well, I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe in that God either. So I think it's, safe to assume that Lewis and the other minister that I mentioned see something really different when they look into where their sense of the divine is. And it looks like maybe Lewis's version of the divine is healthier. So there was a study in the Journal of Religion and Health that looked at the association between views of God and psychiatric symptoms. And this was where things get interesting. They found that belief in a punitive God was associated with anxiety, paranoia, obsession, compulsion. All those things Freud talked about. But belief in a loving God, a benevolent God, was negatively associated with the same symptoms. So in other words, if you believe in a judgmental God, you're more likely to to exhibit major psychiatric symptoms, where if you believe in a loving God, you're less likely to have the same problem. So you might say then that religion is not the problem. What kind of religion? How are you practicing your religion that can determine whether it's healthy or not? So one of the big influences on my thought was a social psychologist and philosopher, Eric Fromm. Read a bunch of his books back when I was kind of figuring out who I was. And he noticed this same kind of phenomenon. He was fascinated by the psychological aspects of religion and what seemed to be, to him, to be a kind of a ubiquitous need for religion by humans. We need religion. And so in a couple of books of his, like The Art of Loving, and there's one called Religion and Psychotherapy, he outlined a distinction between what he saw as two main approaches to religion, which he called either authoritarian or humanistic. Not looking at, not humanistic in the sense of secularized, be humanistic in the sense of basically compassionate, supportive. So authoritarian religion promotes the belief that humans are at the mercy of an omnipotent God or gods. This is his definition. And humanistic religion promotes the idea that the presence or power of God is visible in the actions of the individual and thus provides for personal validation and growth. So I'm using this God word a lot. I promise you I'm going to get around to Buddhism real soon. He said the highest value is the optimal development of one's own powers of reason, love, compassion, and courage. And the humanistic God, then, is a loving God, not a judging one. And so he described the religious experience as a sense of oneness with God. And he said that doesn't have to be theistic. You can experience oneness without attaching that idea of the divine to the idea of some sort of supreme being. He said the love of God is neither the experience of God in thought, nor the thought of one's love for God, but the act of experiencing oneness with God. And such an experience leads to an emphasis in the right way of living, not just believing what you're told is the right things. And concluded that if you consider the experience as it is, free from conceptualizations about it, you could have a non-theistic experience of oneness and consider that religious. And we call that Zen. I mean, that's kind of one of the ways you would define that. So freed from concepts like God, the experience of oneness can be described as letting go of your ego, of your greed, and with it your fears. And I'm going back to Fromm here. This is Fromm. A giving up of the wish to hold on to the ego as if it were an indestructible separate entity, making oneself empty in order to be able to fill oneself with the world, to respond to it, become one with it, to love it. So that should be sounding familiar to you, because if you've been listening to me for a while, you'll recognize that there's some Buddhism in there. And it turns out Fromm was affected by it. I don't know if he was a Buddhist. I don't know if he ever identified that way, but he certainly was influenced by Buddhism. And he felt that it was a good example of a non-authoritarian humanistic religion. He said Buddhism helps man to find the answer to the question of existence, an answer which is essentially the same as that given in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and yet does not contradict the rationality, realism, and independence, which are modern humanity's precious achievements. Paradoxically, he says, Eastern religious thought turns out to be more congenial to Western rational thought than does Western religious thought. So, and I agree with him. I mean, it's one of those things that I read long time ago, and it resonated with me right away. And this was when I was also developing an interest in Buddhism and Zen. So again, I don't know if he considered himself a Buddhist, but he spent a lot of time with D.T. Suzuki exploring Zen and its relationship to psychotherapy. Ellis, by the way, ended up being more friendly to religion too. He mellowed on that a lot later in life. And in fact, got to be really interested in Buddhism after his fifth wife. He was in his 90s when he married her. so so Buddhism, so it's, Buddhism stuff, that's good for you. Anyway, she took him to see the Dalai Lama speak, and after that he started really exploring Buddhism. And he and his wife, who was in her 50s, I think, when they got married, uh, did some workshops together on Buddhism and psychology, Buddhism and REBT, which was his field. So there's probably a lot of other ways to be both humanistic and religious. I spend a lot of time with Unitarian Universalists. You see it there. You see, when I talk to the people from the Sikh community, from the Baha'i, from the former imam, unfortunately, he's not here anymore, at the Islamic Center in Daytona Beach, Father Phil, people like that. I think they are devoutly religious, and yet they are the kind of humanistic religious people that I think Lewis would talk about. So, if we were to design our own approach to religion, we might start by considering what elements of religion are important to human well-being. I mean, that would be a humanistic approach for it. Some elements of religion help people cope with life problems and protect us against spiritual crises. I've used the term spiritually resilient before. It doesn't mean that nothing will affect you. It means that you can be affected, but you recover. So the idea of spiritual support from higher power is actually helpful. If you say Adidaphot just because you say it, it's pointless. But if you say it and really recognize, oh, look, I'm recognizing the divine in this moment, then that's very spiritually helpful. Rituals to facilitate life transitions, those are important and helpful. Forgiveness, support from religious institutions or clergy, the ability to reframe stressful situations into a greater system of meaning. All of those kinds of things really are beneficial to us in terms of our overall well-being. And then, of course, meditation and contemplative practices are powerful tools for change. And a lot of that's been studied, and you see a lot of scientific evidence that says, mindfulness meditation or whatever they happen to be looking at, and all of its benefits. But the reality is that these practices are actually better, stronger, if they're in a religious or spiritual context, rather than standing alone, just doing them for whatever short-term benefit you get. So, for example, there was one study that showed that meditating on a mantra that had religious significance was more effective in pain management than meditating on a word with no spiritual associations. Like, it used to be that people would teach meditation as, say, breathe in, breathe out, one, and just use the word one. Of course, that could have a religious significance, I guess, if you're thinking about it in terms of oneness, but, just in, out, or whatever. And the thing is, something that's spiritually meaningful to you actually helps you manage your pain better, manage your stress better. So, can you have this dimension of life, this focus on the sacred and the transcendent, which is what religion gives us, and still be rational? And I think so. And referring again to Ellis's case against religion, if we focus on a loving God or the sort of humanistic higher truth presented by Fromm's state of oneness, then we could actually end up with a religion that supports emotional health. Ellis said, first, we should be true to ourselves. And that's what he was saying we should do instead of, hi, Monica, glad you're here. First, be true to ourselves rather than just being faithful in some outside entity. And I think that that's a good point. Kindness and consideration for others and things like that should come from the realization that we each want freedom from unnecessary suffering, and the understanding that will come from creating a world in which the rights of all beings are protected. And I don't see any conflict there, nor in Ellis's argument that each of us should assume responsibility for our own life. In fact, I think, I talked about self-power and other power recently, I guess at White Sands during this month, and how other power is not something outside of yourself, and self-power is not the ego, right? These things really, you have to sort of transcend both of those ideas. But that comes from you taking action. We should accept that we live in a world where there are no certainties and be open to change and the infinite variety that's around us. An emotionally healthy person is absorbed in something outside of himself. And Ellis said that, and lots of other people have said that, directed by a sense of purpose and with meaningful involvement with others. And that's something that you can get from religion. So we should be willing to take risks in the interest of higher purpose, approach life with a sense of adventure, be glad to be alive, be free to accept and even like ourselves just because we have the power to live creatively and to bring happiness to the world. So I can't imagine any religion better than that. So I hope that this was helpful. If you've been wondering, about the idea of Buddhism as a religion and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or you've been struggling with a spiritual religious journey, I hope that was helpful for you. So thank you all for being here. It's great to see so many of you here on a stormy night. Of course, you may not be stormy where you are. That's the thing about this. I forget everybody's not in DeLand with me. I'd ask you if there's any questions, but there's such a lag. By the time I saw them, I'd probably be gone. Thank you very much for coming. And if you come on Thursday nights, I will see you tomorrow night. By the way, don't forget that I update the Zoom link periodically. So there will be a new Zoom link next week. So watch for that. Don't show up for a meeting that's not there. I get some of that every time, but I totally get it. You're welcome, Jeff. And also, something else I'd like for you to think about, which is Lunar New Year is coming up. That's the New Year that's celebrated by a lot of the Mahayana Buddhist countries, China, Vietnam, etc. And I was thinking about doing something maybe on Zoom for Lunar New Year's Eve and having us meditating together at midnight, trying to decide whether it's a good idea for me to try to stay out till midnight on a Thursday night because I got work I've got to do on Friday. Anyway, give that some thought. If you have any ideas about that, email me and let me know, or talk to me about it tomorrow in the Zoom meeting. I'll be back here this Sunday. I'll be back at White Sands next Sunday. So thank you again for your time. Have a good evening, and I will see you soon.